Netanyahu has devoted his entire political career to killing the two-state solution and has openly admitted this. He is an enemy of peace, and he can only remain in power as long as the war carries on. Hello everybody once again, and this week we are absent John Henry Weston, who is at the Catholic Prayer for America Gala at Mar-a-Lago. And so today it will just be myself and Father Mer. We have some news about Mar-a-Lago and the Catholic Gala. We've got some news from the Vatican as well about, surprisingly, one or two scandals emerging once again from the Holy See. And after that, a look at world events. So things such as what's going on in Ukraine, and is it really just about the Ukraine war? And what's happened with the peace in the Middle East? And why does that appear to be suddenly breaking down? All this and more on Faith and Reason today. So, Father, if you could start us off with a prayer.
I'll start us off with the simplest credo in the world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
That was it, Frank. That was the simplest credo in the world. That's it.
I'm such an amateur. Really, I do try. Anyway, Father, so we have to say a little bit about where John Henry is today, and I'd say it's quite the occasion. Apparently, according to news reports, nearly 100 members of the Catholic Church clergy are expected to be among those praying for President Donald Trump and the country during an event at Mar-a-Lago, which is advertised as a Catholic Prayer for America Gala, and it features notorious religious extremist John Henry Weston, as well as Dr. Taylor Marshall, and a good friend of the show, Bishop Strickland as well. So I understand that you got an invitation as well, Father.
I did. They seemed to have 2 or 3 extra seats that they needed filled, and at the last minute they called, could I provide a filling? No. I was invited, but it's just the distance at my age, Yeah, they go hand in hand, and I said, no, thank you very much, not this time. You know what's interesting though about this meeting, and I really was tempted to make it, but I'm sorry, I just don't travel well. I'm sort of like vintage wine in that regard anyway. What's interesting in this meeting is, of course, they're going to pray for the church, and they're going to pray for the Catholic presence in the United States, and also in governing the United States. This is very good. We have our input, if you will. But I also know, and this is what I'm praying for from overseas, that they are going to approach members of the cabinet who are going to be present. And if the president himself shows up, which I believe he will, they are going to approach him and ask seriously and formally that the Catholic bishops of the United States, the Episcopal Conference, be investigated a little bit more seriously. You see what's happening? I don't know if people understand this. I think I do. The reason that our bishops are very weak on such as abortion or same-sex marriages, this, that, and the other, they're weak in denouncing these things, is because they've already taken money from the government that holds the contrary positions. Well, I'd like to know, and so do a number of Catholics, millions of Catholics, as a matter of fact, want to know how much our faith is being influenced by political agendas. That's exactly what they're pushing for. And I think they're going to get that. Our bishops seem to be a little bit ill at ease. They're calling for all Catholics to back them, asking for more federal monies and tax money. My opinion of the matter doesn't matter, but for what it's worth, I really wish that they would get out of that business completely and just give from what Catholics give to Catholic charities, for example, or to their parishes or to their bishops in the bishop's annual collection, what have you. But stay away from government funding. When we started taking that in Catholic education in the United States, around the beginning of the 70s, all of a sudden crucifixes had to come down. Certain things couldn't be taught in catechism. Our religious identity was lost because we accepted federal aid and state aid, and that can't be. We don't need that. It would be better, I think, not to exist than to exist that way. That's not the mission of the church. You're stifling our message by anything like that politically. You're committing. When somebody gives you money and they ask for a favor, you're a little bit between a rock and a hard place. It's yes, it's always good to really think that seriously. And I think our bishops have a lot to think about. And I believe that all of those who are gathered in Mar-a-Lago these days are going to propose an investigation of that. We'd like the clarity of the faith back.
Well, it goes beyond the politicization of the church to the sponsorship and use of government money. It also includes the scandal that's brewing over Cardinal McElroy's complicity in alleged rape charges, which Lifesight News covered last week. There is also calls for an investigation into this as well. So the church does appear to be facing some very serious consequences following this.
Washington, D.C. seems to be a very touchy place to accept becoming archbishop. It's a dangerous place.
It's certainly, times are changing now. And it remains to be seen how much of that change or how quickly that will come to the hierarchy of the church itself. But it seems to be coming to its door very quickly. In addition to this, there's not only this scandal facing the church, but there's also the issue of the use of Rupnik's art once again on the Feast of St. Joseph, which is today, as we're recording today. And this is once again used in a cycle, that's said, of the repetition of Rupnik's art, which has continued to be displayed despite the considerable scandal attached to his name. Do you have anything to add about that, Father?
Yeah, just the Rupnik situation. I was recently in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and then back to Sao Paulo. And we stopped at a beautiful, beautiful Marian shrine, Nuestra Señora Aparecida. The devotion there is unbelievable. This is a weekday, and it was packed with people just coming to pay their respects to the Blessed Mother.
And according to Michael Haynes, it says that the Vatican has again used Rupnik art during a recurring cycle of his art. So it isn't just one instance. This is apparently due to a policy of deliberately displaying his art in a repetitive manner. So it does seem to be an explicit act of support. I think it's obviously inexplicable and a source of continuing controversy. It's regrettable. But as we mentioned just now, that it does appear that there is a sea change in the political and secular world, if not only in geopolitics, which appears to be coming back to the church's door. It doesn't appear to enjoy the partnership with the liberal global empire anymore, as that has been abandoned by the United States. So we can see significant changes in the world, which appear to be correcting this formerly comfortable relationship between a partnership with a largely adjacent agenda of open borders, of the LGBT movement, and the net zero goals, which have been enthusiastically embraced by the church in documents such as Laudato Si. But this week, of course, has brought some very significant results in the wider world as well, especially over Ukraine, with a phone call from President Trump between him and Putin, in fact, resulting in a significant improvement immediately in US-Russia relations, and a declaration that peace is now far more likely in the world than it was beforehand. As news emerges of a successful phone call between Trump and Putin, it's important to remember that the broader view is that this is not simply about the cessation of the Ukraine war. Much of the media commentary has concentrated upon the idea of an immediate ceasefire, which, puzzlingly, the Americans appear to have agreed independently of the Russians before the talks took place between Trump and Putin. But this can be explained, and so can the celebratory tone following the phone call, by the fact that this isn't about the Ukraine war alone. This is about the fact that the United States is now pursuing a completely different grand strategy, pursuing a geopolitics of peace, trade, and mutual recognition of interests, in place of the liberal global empire that sought to expand itself through international organisations like NATO and the World Economic Forum, using, of course, war and cultural propaganda to do so. So what the Trump administration is now doing is a break with perhaps the past 70 years of United States grand strategy, and it signals an enormous shift, which is the reason why, in addition, the projects such as USAID or USAID have overnight changed from grand strategy and the attempt to export a global culture worldwide to corruption, because the United States national interest is no longer interested in a global empire, and it has turned away from all the architecture that served that ambition. This is the reason why these enterprises are now described as a waste of money, because of course they were bankrupting the United States as well. So the United States has pivoted towards a new policy, and that policy means rapprochement or understanding with former enemies, and this position has led to considerable controversy in the Middle East. On the discovery that the United States government under Trump had been since day one talking to Hamas, the Israelis under Netanyahu immediately leaked this news to the press in the hope of sabotaging ceasefire negotiations and a move away from the slaughter in Gaza. This is the reason that the ceasefire has now been broken down, as the Israelis resumed airstrikes 2 days ago. Massive strikes have resumed on Gaza, with the Israeli press, only in Hebrew, reporting that Netanyahu and his inner circle were enraged at the news that the United States was independently pursuing a pathway to peace without the knowledge of the Israeli Prime Minister. Upon hearing about this, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his envoy Ron Dermer immediately set about, according to a report in Yediot Aharonot in Hebrew, trying to sabotage the peace process, and it appears that they have had some success in doing so, in launching these airstrikes. Whilst many commentators say, with some justification, that the enormous influence of the Zionist lobby in the United States government and in its Congress and Senate means that Donald Trump must be in the pocket of the Israelis, the Hebrew-only press from Israel tells a different story. It says that the Israeli government is enraged by the independent moves towards peace and has done its utmost to sabotage them. So rather than being in the pocket of the Israelis, it would appear that Donald Trump's sincere moves towards resolving the 70-year crisis in the Middle East around Israel has simply resulted in a severe enmity between himself and the number one recipient of US aid over the last 7 decades. This is a significant moment in US-Israel relations, as this tension has not been seen since the assassination of President Kennedy, who was the last president to issue any kind of ultimatum to the Israelis. And of course his brother, Robert, was the last US Attorney General to threaten to have their lobby registered as a foreign agent. Despite the fact that Israel's lobby is enormously influential, it to this day has not been registered as a foreign agent. And this week Candace Owens did a very interesting interview that LifeSite reported on that explained why. Basically, Candace said, because Kennedy got shot.
And then what happened was he was shot. So he literally, they were writing him letters. You can find this. This is all this is available information. And he was like, you need to register, you need to register, you need to register. And then we told you to register. Why are you not registering? This makes no sense. And then AIPAC got lucky because he got shot and killed.
What also you could
So they are the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to further conspiracy theories.
Country?
They're the only country that's allowed to lobby Americans that are not registered under the FAR Act.
Frank, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening inside Israel?
If you read the Israeli press, the Hebrew language press, if you pay close attention to what the Israelis are saying, a very different picture emerges. Far from being an omnipotent presence who pulls the strings of governments internationally, Benjamin Netanyahu is surrounded by crisis. His inner circle is shrinking. He's currently trying to remove the head of what's effectively the Israeli FBI, which is called Shin Bet. He's trying to get rid of the head of the Israeli security service because they're investigating him, because he's implicated in an enormous scandal called Qatargate, which involves him having taken money personally and to his associates over the past 13 years, involving him paying Hamas with Qatari money by telling his agents to cross the border into Gaza with suitcases full of US dollars. This is an enormous scandal that threatens to bring him down, amidst other scandals about him perverting the judiciary, and the Attorney General of Israel is about to tell him that he's destroying Israel's democracy. Reports also come from other Israeli sources, again in Hebrew, some in English, saying that Israel now stands on the brink of civil war, with the country roughly divided, around 50-50, between people who support Benjamin Netanyahu broadly or fanatically, and people who are concerned that he is driving it into the abyss, as some say. 2 years ago, the former chief of Mossad, a man called Tamir Pardo, warned the world that Benjamin Netanyahu was leading Israel into self-destruction. Now, the reports again, very seldom in English, but very often now in Hebrew, from the army show an exhausted and overextended force that is suffering increasing desertions, that complains of having no clear military goal in Gaza or indeed in any of its wars, of a constitutional crisis where Israel's democracy is being destroyed. And these are not merely liberals who say this about Netanyahu. He is not being criticised solely from the left, but from the right as well, and from significant figures like Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett and Gadi Eisenkot. Lapid and Bennett are former prime ministers of Israel themselves, and Eisenkot is the former chief of the Israeli army. And all these people, together with many others, are now saying that Israel faces a grave crisis as its economy suffers terrible damage as well, from the compound wars which Netanyahu is charged with continuing simply to remain in power. Practically everybody outside his inner circle now accuse him of having sabotaged every hostage deal over the last year to remain in power, of having prolonged and started wars to remain in power, to distract Israelis and the world from the serious crises that are building around him, which he has created himself. So, the impression that you may get from the media is a profoundly different one from the Israeli media itself. And I think this may be one reason why you only ever see these reports in the Hebrew language, because it's very difficult to find them in the first place, and it's also very difficult to translate them. But I do write about them myself and have some first-rate sources on the ground from which I would get these directions and this news myself. And it can be seen, and it is basically gives you a very different picture of world events from the one that we see presented on the nightly news. Israel is in a state of crisis and is indeed on the brink of civil war, say many of its leading commentators.
For U.S. residents, creating a will has never been easier. Thanks to My Legacy Will, an online platform free of charge, you can now create your own will and choose to include LifeSite News in it, specify where your funeral will take place, the number of masses to be offered for your soul, and how your estate will be distributed. We would be deeply grateful if you remembered LifeSite News in your will. Visit mylegacywill.com/LifeSite News. Thank you for your support, and may God bless you.
It's that serious in Israel. Why, I didn't have any clue of that. I had no clue of that.
Well, no, the press in the West, especially in America and Britain, have been strongly pro-Israel for a very long time, for reasons that we can't go into today. But the Israeli press, and not just the liberal press, the liberal newspaper is Haaretz, which is like the Guardian newspaper that we have in England, very left-wing. But the non-liberal press, even there's a newspaper that's owned by Sheldon Adelson's wife. The late Sheldon Adelson is a great sponsor of Donald Trump. The Adelsons are the casino magnates that have given, I think, $540 million to Trump and his circle over the past 9 years. Miriam Adelson, of course, is his widow, and she owns a newspaper called Israel Hayom. Now, that newspaper was bought by Sheldon Adelson to propel Netanyahu into power during his last election campaign. So it was a pro-Netanyahu newspaper. But Israel Hayom is now publishing stories saying that Netanyahu threatens not only the nature of Israeli democracy, but the integrity of the state itself. People simply don't realize that Netanyahu's national security minister is a convicted terrorist who was implicated in the incitement to murder Yitzhak Rabin in 1994. Is a seriously committed Jewish supremacist who leads a party called Jewish Power. Now, this man, who's called Itamar Ben-Gvir, recently stormed out of the government over the fact that Netanyahu appeared to be committed to a hostage deal. And he was outraged by this because he pursues a maximalist policy of basically annihilating or expelling all the non-Jewish population. So people like him are now criticising Netanyahu as well. And the formerly loyal press are criticising him. So it's important, very significant to notice that these reports of a severe crisis in Israel are not simply coming from liberal critics. Netanyahu is struggling to try and present himself as an embattled figure on the lines of Donald Trump fighting a hostile deep state. But there's nothing of the sort. If you look at who is attempting to prosecute him and for what, you will see that Netanyahu is clearly guilty. of these corruption charges and has attempted to dismantle the judiciary and has so severely undermined the rule of law that his former security minister, National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, is charged with having led the police into a kind of private militia where ordinary crimes are no longer investigated, but they are mobilized in order to defend the increasingly extreme agenda of the shrinking power, I would say, of the Netanyahu government. In my view, I think the Americans have one way out, and that is to hang the whole mess around Netanyahu's neck. This is the man, after all, who has led the United States into war after war, from Iraq to Syria to Libya, and now he's attempting to drag them into a war with Iran. This is the man who's been the architect of so much disorder and the saboteur of peace for many years, and who is himself pursued by allegations that he too incited the murder of Yitzhak Rabin, who was the last Israeli Prime Minister, really, to try to realise the two-state solution. Netanyahu has devoted his entire political career to killing the two-state solution and has openly admitted this. He is an enemy of peace, and he can only remain in power as long as the war carries on. With the United States dedicated to peace, it would seem that Netanyahu is simply running out of road.
Continuing the war and the war effort has been historically very good for dictators.
And it would seem that an increasing number of Israelis do describe him in that way. The criticisms began several years ago, saying that Israeli democracy was undermined, but now it is a chorus of voices from across the political spectrum, even from people from far to the right of him, and now his enemies, because people are accusing him now. His former national security minister said that he simply seeks these sabotage of peace, the sabotage of hostage deals for his own self-interest. So his former allies denounce him as a man who is motivated only by his own self-interest and the pursuit of his own career, at the expense of the integrity and even the survival of Israel itself. So Israelis are now talking seriously about existential crisis in Israel that threatens the survival and integrity of their own nation. Shocking news from the Middle East, and quite a different narrative from what you might read in the English-speaking social and broadcast media.
Absolutely.
So we have an array of remarkable news in a... It is indeed. And this is why it's important to read these kind of things. If you are a sad person like myself with an otherwise eventless life, this is how you spend your time, reading painstaking translations of Israeli editorials in Hebrew. So that, as you can see, you get a glimpse behind the scenes at my fascinating and glamorous existence.
You baffle us all with your footwork. So it's so incredible, your footwork. When they used to say that about boxers, if you don't have a good punch, the footwork. Dazzle them with your footwork. You do such a great job at that. We didn't realize what a sad life a sad existence you're living.
Why, thank you very much, Father. Well, the last thing we'd have to say, really, is that this week has seen, finally, after, I think, perhaps 60 years, the disclosure of the JFK files, which initially do appear to suggest that there has been a collusion, at the very least, at the very highest levels, between the former chief of the American intelligence services and those of the Israelis, and this has been formally redacted. So one major revelation so far, with 60,000+ pages to go through, we probably have a lot more to come out. But we've also seen that John F. Kennedy himself wrote a letter denouncing in the 1960s Joe Biden as a traitor to the United States, in one early shocking revelation as well. So there is certainly a lot more to come there from the JFK files that sees many pages which were formally redacted. That's to say, many pages that formerly had sections blacked out have now been made public. And it's still too early to say what's come out. And I wouldn't pay too much attention to people saying that this is a nothing burger, because the data has been released apparently completely. It's very disorganized, and it's going to take some time to get through it, because of course it's on paper, it isn't digitized yet, and there's no searchable archive at the time of speaking. But I think one won't be short in coming. I think we'll see that soon.
Yeah, undoubtedly, this is an historic event, and it's going to be filled with, as you say, maybe it won't even lend all of that much to the Kennedy assassination event, but there are an awful lot of other things that come out in the wash, aren't there? Things that we would call secondary, but they're not so secondary. In the light of history, they're very important events.
I've had a brief look today, and the majority of the things that I've seen have been probably would be alarming news for people about the degree of cultural subversion pursued by the CIA and its cutouts. So what the United States government was already doing in the 1950s and 1960s in terms of sponsoring broadcast media, attempting to shape and form public opinion, but mainly propagandizing its own subject nations, if you like, the so-called free democracies of the West. And to see that that architecture has been exposed, and it's been going on for 70, 60 years. It's not just the recent USAID scandal. I think that would be quite an eye-opener for Americans too. So we live in a time of enormous change and of a certain secular age of revelation, where I would argue that the real architecture of what's been sold to us as liberal democracy is being revealed to us at enormous speed. So these are very big revelations. If you look at it like that, we're pulling back the curtain on how power has been conducted in the world that was formerly known as free, because as you may notice, nobody really calls it the free world anymore, do they?
You know, you're just making me remember, causing me to think back on my student days in Rome during all of the 70s. And the many times I was alone as an American in a group of I was going to say foreigners, but I was just as foreign as they were. we were students from all over the world, talking about different politics, different political situations in the world. And almost all of those students, whether they were some were from Vietnam, some were from China, some were from Mexico, Brazil, all over the world, they all had the same attitude that the United States and the CIA especially was up to much more than I ever realized. And they all thought of me as being very naive, very American, they called me, very American. And I thought it was my duty to be defending my country, right, as a loyal American. But listening to their arguments, they were strong arguments, how the CIA or the American government had overthrown this government, had overthrown another government in Chile, and this and the other thing throughout the years. To their own advantages. And I thought all of that was just made up. I came to discover later on when I worked in Mexico for 15 years that it was not made up.
It's remarkable for Westerners to realize this, because they haven't been on the receiving end of it, or so they thought. And now we're finding out that actually all this regime change that we thought just took place abroad has actually been taking place at home as well. Turns out that we weren't as free as we thought. We're simply propaganda naive. So, this is quite the revelation, if you like.
Frank, you hit something that's very, very crucial it's crucial to this. Not only have we been toppling governments all over the world, but we've been in charge of toppling our own when it wasn't to our liking, or to the CIA, or to whoever it is. I would say the CIA has a fat hand in everything. But yes, even American politics, that I find the most shocking thing. I could take our overthrowing different governments in different parts of the world for our own purposes, although that's wrong. I'm not saying it's right, it's wrong. But to our own, and that would be a secret to the American population, to the American people. Amazing. That I find amazing.
We live in a time where people are finding out that most of our popular culture for most of the last 100 years has been little more than a message from its sponsors. This is the reason why you might get the feeling sometimes that you're living in an advertisement, and that's because you are. And so I think we should close with the wishes of John Henry Weston, who, as he was making his way to Mar-a-Lago, asked me to pray for him. And I think if we could all pray for him and for the Catholic Gala and for the fate of the leadership of the free world in the United States, and if you could lead us in a prayer for that, Father, I think that would be the best thing we could do right now.
Certainly. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra, panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie. Et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos divitimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sanctus descende super vos et manet semper. Amen. And that blessing particularly goes out to you, John Henry. We're missing you here. God bless. Thank you, Frank.
God bless you, John Henry.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Father, and thank you all. And we'll see you again next time on Faith and Reason.
Aloha, everyone. This is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.